When Lauren McCluskey began to date 28-year-old Shawn Fields, she hoped she would find love. But following an accidental discovery, she had come to realize that the man she was dating was actually a convicted felon with a different name and a terrifyingly different age. In a desperate attempt to get rid of this dangerous liar, Lauren cut all contact with him. But tragically, she was dealing with a man who was capable of stalking, blackmail, and even murder. As the days passed by, she felt intense pressure from Shawn, whose real name was actually Melvin Rowland. And despite pleading for help from the university security and even police, her cries continuously fell on deaf ears. So, how did this tragedy unfold? Who was Melvin Rowland? How did the system fail Lauren? And what happened next? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're looking at an extremely frustrating case. Now, law enforcement is often the subject of very heavy criticism, sometimes unfairly, and sometimes it is very valid. And this case serves as a painful example of how miserable it can fail. Before we begin, and just to let you know that I post true crime and strange cases here weekly, so if that does sound like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat, and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of Lauren McCluskey. On the 12th of February 1997, Lauren McCluskey was born in Berkeley, California, to her parents Matt and Jill McCluskey. It was shortly after her birth that her mother and father joined Washington State University as professors, and left Berkeley to relocate to Pullman, Washington. And so, before we begin our story today, let's take a closer look at the place where Lauren spent her childhood growing up. Located in the southeast corner of the state, Pullman has a moderate population of nearly 33,000 people. Most known for playing host to the University of Washington, it is also an excellent destination for its natural scenery and exploration. With the city being situated in a picturesque valley, it is surrounded by fields of wheat, barley, lentils, and peas. And as you can imagine, its location lends itself to being a fantastic place to soak up the views when hiking. With many gorgeous parks, hiking trails, and outdoor vistas, Pullman is the place to be to enjoy the refreshing air and beautiful surroundings. And when you come back to its civilization, the city has a great selection of bars and restaurants, which are vibrantly filled by families and college students alike. Growing up in a city with the charm of a college town and with incredible access to nature, Lauren was in the perfect spot to enjoy her childhood with her family. She spent most of her time outdoors, climbing trees, jumping walls, and enjoying the great wildlife with her brother, Ryan. Described as fearless, loving, and sensitive, Lauren was no stranger to working hard, and playing hard too. Throughout her teenage years, she was innately athletic, and loved to show off around her family. And to add to this, she was a very bright and gifted young girl too. Encouraged by her parents, Lauren entered her first Junior Olympic Association track at the age of 8 years old. And due to her exceptional talents, she was very quickly recognized, as she set Junior Olympic records in the high jump, long jump, and 400-meter run. Competing in national events such as the high jump and hurdles, she earned the USA Track and Field All-American Award 19 times and set many USA Track and Field Youth records, 12 of which impressively still stand to this day. However, despite being so dominant on the track, Lauren continued to be friendly, humble, and outgoing towards her competitors and teammates alike. And as she competed nationally, she formed many friendships with athletes, families, and coaches from all across the United States. As a high school freshman, she was also the Washington State High School champion in high jump. And after attending her junior year at Andrews Osborne Academy in Ohio, she then returned to Pullman, Washington for a senior year of high school. Now, Lauren was not only dedicated about athletics, but also had a deep affection for animals. And when she wasn't busy studying or training, she would often be down at the local animal welfare center to help look after cats. To add to this, she also volunteered for the Special Olympics and often worked at local community centers near her home. After graduating high school, Lauren sought to continue her athletic career at university. And after selecting the University of Utah, she excitedly began her freshman year. Professors described her as quiet, but more importantly, she seemed to choose her words very carefully and never had any unkind words to say. She made many friends in her new environment, and to be honest, it is quite easy to see why. She was pretty good at dancing, very good at singing, would do karaoke often, and was even a stand-up comedian. Now, to say that she blossomed in college really is an understatement. And over the years, Lauren progressed through university with stellar grades and a tight-knit group of friends. It was on a usual day in her senior year of university that Lauren decided to go downtown Salt Lake City for a fun night out with her roommate Alex. They eventually decided to go to a popular local bar called the London Bell, and just as Lauren and her roommate approached the front door, they were met with a tall 28-year-old bouncer named Shawn. After allowing the girls to go into the bar, Shawn continued to check up on them throughout the night, often making sure they were having a good time while making sure their drinks were full. And no surprise, it was obvious to Lauren that Shawn was into her. As the night came to a close and Lauren decided to leave the bar, she felt so pleased with his attention that she decided that she would do something rather unusual. And just as she approached to leave, she headed up to Shawn and gave him a napkin with a phone number written down. While this was not something that Lauren would typically do, she was in her senior year of school, and after almost 4 successful years away from her hometown and away from her family, she understandably felt confident to be out in the real world on her own. Being a bouncer, Shawn was a figure of safety and security, and Lauren naturally felt comfortable in that assumption. She'd hoped that, in the following days, he may message her back. To her delight, Shawn messaged her the very next day, and soon after they both planned their first date to go rock climbing. When Lauren arrived, she received a bouquet of roses and then was treated to dinner afterwards. After their date, Lauren called her mother pretty much immediately, and apparently she couldn't stop talking about how handsome he was and how sweet and caring he seemed. During their time together, Shawn told Lauren that he wasn't actually from Utah. He'd grown up in New York and was working part-time to help fund his computer science degree. Being 7 years older than her daughter, Jill was rather uncomfortable with her dating Shawn. But then again, she was always rather mature for her age, so the family wasn't that surprised. As the two began to date, Lauren's roommates and friends were happy to see her happy, and her best friend, Alex, thought that the pair appeared to be a really good couple. At least, in the beginning, it seemed that way. Now at first, he would take her out on dinner dates, picnics, or even just walks around the city. In addition to this, he often bought her flowers, offered to pay for the meals, and all around seemed like the perfect gentleman. However, as time passed by and their relationship progressed, Alex began to notice some very concerning signs. This was because Shawn began to display some controlling tendencies. This even including Lauren needing to ask permission if she wanted to go out with her friends to a bar. Lauren was also instructed to always be within reach of her phone. Friends noted that she made sure to respond to Shawn as soon as possible whenever he messaged her, and it got to the point where she would sometimes ask Alex to respond to Shawn while she was driving. Lauren also mentioned how Shawn would get upset or even angry if she went out to socialize without him. He hated it when she talked to other men, and would often call her to ask where she was and who she was with. When Alex asked Lauren about these concerning behaviors, Lauren always seemed to brush it off. She told her that Shawn never meant any harm, and that he had simply been cheated on in the past and had some trust issues he was working through. As the weeks passed by, friends began to notice that Lauren's relationship was taking a mental and even a physical toll on her. And so, with that in mind, they went to the local campus office to file a complaint. They mentioned how Shawn was becoming controlling, was unable to establish healthy boundaries, and was even exercising his power in almost every aspect of the relationship. They also highlighted that, rather concerningly, he would sometimes bring his firearm to Lauren's apartment. And with that apartment being on the campus, it was strictly against rules. But despite speaking with the housing staff and campus security, all of their words fell on deaf ears, and apparently nothing was done about it. As the autumn break approached, Lauren and Shawn continued to date, while her friends continued to worry behind the scenes. It was just before she had planned to go home to see her family that, by chance, Lauren accidentally saw his ID card for the first time, and, concerningly, it had some very worrying details. Although his face was clearly visible in the photo, the name next to it was far less recognizable. The man was not actually named Shawn. Instead, the card seemed to belong to someone named Melvin Rowland. Naturally, this confused and scared Lauren, but instead of confronting him right away, she wanted to do her own research first. Of course, to try and find out who the man she had been dating actually was. And so, on October the 5th, roughly 1 month after beginning their relationship, Lauren finally returned to her hometown of Pullman. With some physical space from Shawn, she began to reflect on their relationship so far and about his lies. Maybe Alex was right. She had expressed a concern multiple times before, after all, and he certainly had some explaining to do about his name too. Jumping onto her computer, she began to do some online research, and to her horror, she found out that the 28-year-old man that she had been dating was, in reality, a falsified disguise for a much more terrifying person beneath. As it turns out, Shawn had been lying about almost every aspect of his life to Lauren. Melvin Rowland was actually 37, not 28, and to make things worse, he had a very long list of offences. This included 14 years spent in jail and on parole, and not only was he a convicted felon, but to her absolute disgust, he was also a registered sex offender. Diving into Melvin's past for a moment, but Melvin Rowland was born in Brooklyn, New York, on May 12, 1981. Although he was adopted, his new parents, Austin and Ann Rowland, did their very best to give him a second chance at life. His childhood was described as excellent, and he lived a very happy and carefree life. That was until his adoptive parents suddenly passed away when he was only 15 years old. After the tragedy of losing his parental figures a second time, he was then placed in a group home where he remained until he was 17 years old, before then attending a private school in Colorado. After turning 20 years old, he then moved to Utah to attend the Jobs Corps program. While there, he claimed to have attained a certified nurse assistant license. Melvin then moved to Salt Lake City, where he attended Salt Lake Community College, before transferring to the University of Utah in 2004. He remained here afterwards, sharing an apartment with his roommates. This is where Melvin's dark and dangerous side begins. It was in March of 2004 that Melvin pleaded guilty to charges of attempted forcible sexual abuse and enticing a minor over the internet. Later that summer, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison, being eligible for parole after only 1 single year. It was 8 years later, in July of 2012, that Melvin was granted parole. However, only 3 months later, he was put back behind bars for breaking multiple terms of his parole agreement. He would spend 1 more year in prison, before being granted parole a second time in September of 2013. Melvin then lived in Salt Lake City for 2 years without incident, though after running into the back of another car in October 2015 and fleeing the scene, he once again found himself in hot water with a warrant out for his arrest. After avoiding law enforcement and parole agents for a total of 5 months, he then contacted his parole officer before eventually turning himself in. He was then incarcerated until April 17, 2018, and despite violating his parole twice, he was then granted parole a 3rd time and released back into the public. You would think that, after failing to abide by the rules of his parole and proving to be a recurring threat to the public, he would somehow be forced to stay in jail. However, this was not the case, and after being in and out of prison for the last 14 years, he was put back on parole for the 3rd time. Under his new conditions, he was not allowed to use any form of social media, and to add to this, was not allowed to take any sort of illegal drug. And since he was now a registered sex offender, he obviously was not allowed to have any contact with minors, unless given express permission by his parole officer. After Melvin was released from jail, he found work at the Black Diamond Security Group, which doesn't make much sense, by the way. Like, are you just hiring convicts now? Anyway, it was through this group that he became a bouncer working at the London Bell Bar, and as we know, that is how he met Lauren McCluskey. As you can imagine, following the very disturbing discovery, Lauren sought help from both her mother and her friends. And also as expected, everyone urged her to break up with him as soon as possible and then cut all contact. Although she was nervous and unsure about how to go about confronting Melvin, she did agree it was probably the best option. And after returning to university on the 9th of October, she was finally ready to face the man who she no longer recognized. Now, before returning to Pullman to see her family, she had agreed to let Melvin borrow her car. This complicated matters, as in order to get it back, she would of course have to meet him 1 more time in person to get the keys. And naturally, after traveling back to Utah, she was quite apprehensive about meeting him. But with words of encouragement from Alex, her mother, and multiple friends, she eventually messaged Melvin to say that they needed to talk. Sitting in her room, she waited for him to arrive while she spoke to Alex about the situation, and after being on the phone for more than an hour, That is when she noticed some sort of movement outside of the window. Walking across her room, she stuck her head outside to see what it was. And to her horror, it was Melvin who was crouched underneath the window. Shockingly, he had listened to the entire conversation. Now, Melvin was furious. He stormed into the apartment where he demanded that she stopped talking to Alex immediately. Apparently, she had no right to be talking about their relationship. And of course, it was in this moment that Lauren brought up everything she had found out about him. It was at that moment that Lauren told Melvin that she was done with the relationship. He had completely violated her trust, and she had no interest in being involved with someone who was so manipulative and dangerous. Melvin denied everything, and furthermore refused to take her seriously. He said that, in reality, he actually didn't do any of the things that he was sent to jail for. However, Lauren wasn't buying any of his lies. She further told him that she no longer wanted to see him. Sadly, Melvin was not taking no for an answer, and being both tall and muscular, he easily overpowered Lauren. He spent the entire night in her room, blocking her from leaving while he continued to try and convince her. Frustratingly, the argument carried on into the late hours of the morning, with Lauren eventually convincing Melvin to let her go so she could go to track practice. Likely as a way for him to continue with his manipulation, he asked if he could borrow her car one more time to run some errands. At least that way, he had one more opportunity to see her. It was later that same day that Lauren received strange text messages from an unknown number. "Why'd you break up with the big guy? He really loves you," the first message read. This was followed by another message from a different number, this one saying, "I'm going to drop your car off. Melvin can't stand to look at you after the breakup." Reaching out to her mother for advice, she decided to contact campus security. Something about the car situation seemed very off to her, and Jill wanted to make sure that her daughter was not about to put herself in danger. She doubted that it was actually Melvin's friend sending the messages too, and suspected that he was using a burner phone to find an opportunity to see Lauren again.
University Police Security, how can I help you?
Hi, I would like to request some help from my daughter, who's a student at University of Utah.
Okay. What is the situation exactly? What does your daughter need help with?
Okay, so she was dating someone who's not a student, and he has her car. She broke up with him, and he's supposed to return it to the parking lot at the stadium.
Uh-huh.
And I'm worried that he's dangerous.
Okay, we can definitely have someone help her out. Can you have your daughter give us a call?
Okay, so let me tell you just a little bit more. So he was lying to her,
Okay.
and he's actually a sexual offender.
Okay.
And lied about his age and things like that.
Okay.
And then he has her car, and he wants her to return. One of his friends wants her to return the car to the stadium parking lot at 5 o'clock. And since it's fall break, a bunch of her friends aren't there, so I'm worried she's going to go there alone and someone's going to hurt her.
Definitely. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so I would just like someone to accompany her, because a bunch of her friends are out of town. I don't want her to go there by herself and have something bad happen to her.
Because that would be totally easy for us to send someone with her. I wouldn't want her to go into a bad situation by herself. So
Okay,
let me give her a call real quick. Yeah, no problem, Jill. I will give you a call back in a little bit, okay? Okay, thanks, Jill. Bye-bye.
In the end, Lauren messaged back to arrange to have her car left at the university stadium, and with the help of her mother and staff, a university security officer collected the car anonymously.
Joe, I got a message. I got a missed call from you.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a heads up. I just wanted to let you know that we did have our officer pick up Lauren. We had him wait with her while she found the key, and then I watched her drive away on the cameras. So
yeah, so she texted me too that she got the car back. So thank you so much. You guys are so wonderful. I so much appreciate it.
Despite the happy resolution, Lauren continued to get strange messages in the following days. One of the messages said, "Go yourself." 2 days later, another message told her that Melvin had taken his life because of their broken relationship. Now, Lauren was a very smart young woman. She had always performed well in school and was a very quick thinker. And although she had fallen victim to his manipulation in the past, it became increasingly obvious that these numbers were not random people at all. Of course, they were Melvin. Looking through all of the messages she received over those previous days, she noticed the same spelling errors, distinct word choices, and grammatical mistakes that he would often use on messaging her. And alongside these commonalities, Lauren noticed that he had also posted on Facebook in the recent days, slightly spoiling the illusion of having taken his own life. Safe to say, Lauren had enough. She decided to contact university security and report his manipulative messages. She further showed all of the messages that she had, both from Melvin and from the random numbers.
University Police and Security, how can I help you?
Hi, this is Lauren. I called a few days ago about a situation, and I wanted to kind of give an update. Well, basically, so...
Did you make a report?
I did not.
Okay, so you called a couple days ago about a situation you wanted to follow up on?
Well, I guess it's kind of a different situation, but it's related in a way.
Okay,
but,
so you didn't make a report. Did you talk to a police officer?
I had a security person drive me to pick up my car.
Uh-huh.
What happened was that, so I got the car and that was fine, but I've been getting these texts from these numbers that of different people saying that they were saying that he was in the hospital and then saying that that he passed away. But then I got a text from him and he seems to be alive. So, and then I got a text about, asking if I wanted to go to his funeral. And I think they're trying to lure me somewhere.
So you got a bunch of texts seeming like they're trying to get you to go somewhere. And have you asked them to stop texting you?
I have not, but I've blocked a few of the numbers already.
All right. I will send this through an officer to give you a call. He's going to give you a call on that last phone number that you gave me. Is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, perfect. I'll have somebody call you shortly.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Despite contacting the police, she continues to receive messages the following days, each one growing with aggression. And on October the 13th, the real threats began. Lauren was told that, should she fail to pay $1,000, her nudes would be leaked to the public. One of these photos was one that she knew she'd taken with Melvin, so it kind of confirmed that this was him. And after thinking about her life and how hard she'd worked to get up to this point, of course, she began to panic. She was terrified that this explicit blackmail had the potential to ruin her life, and the idea of these photos circulating around her campus, where she was well known, well, it was all too much to think about. That very same day, she made the decision to transfer $1,000 to Melvin's bank account, hoping that this would be the last time she would ever hear from him. Just a side note to all of you out there, by the way, but it is worth highlighting that blackmail is illegal in most countries around the world. So, if you ever do find yourself being blackmailed, it is worth challenging the person trying to extort you by reminding them of this. Anyway, after sending the money, Lauren once again reached out to the campus police officers, and additional screenshots were sent, hoping this would aid their own internal investigation.
Hi, so I'm dealing with a situation where I'm being blackmailed for money. It's so a photo of me and my ex. They're threatening to send it out to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And she's asking for $1,000.
And this is over text?
Well, at first it was an email, and then over that app.
Has this happened before, or has it been happening, or is this the first time?
This is the first time.
All right.
There had been some harassment before.
Okay, but you have had involvement with this person?
Yeah.
What's your relation to him?
My ex-boyfriend.
Okay.
Despite her extensive reporting, the university seemed to be doing nothing about Lauren's case, and so it is quite understandable why she was so anxious and nervous about the situation. She then decided to go to the Salt Lake City Police Department for support. However, after arriving, they told her they could be of no service because it had to be dealt with by campus security. They routed her back to the University of Utah, but they too had no new updates for her. Quite understandably, Lauren felt absolutely defeated. Several days later, on October the 19th, she once again called Salt Lake City PD to say that the university were doing absolutely nothing with her case. But again, she was met with the same resistance. As the messages continued, unfortunately, so did her grief. It was no wonder why Lauren was so desperate for some help. She was at risk, and she desperately wanted protection. Later that day, a detective from the campus police reached out to Lauren to say they had finally opened a case against Melvin. Apparently, the officer she had initially contacted had actually gone on holiday, and this is why the case never received any updates. The new detective said that, although they were working on it, it would take some time to prove that Melvin was behind those messages. And so, for now, she would just have to sit tight. But sadly, despite all this newfound effort, it would be all too little too late. 3 days later, on October the 22nd, Lauren received a message from an unrecognized number. The message was from someone claiming to be the deputy chief of the university campus police, and it read, "I planned on calling you, but I'm at a meeting at the moment. Can you go to the station as soon as possible? There's something I need for you to see. I will go over the details with you when you get here." This made Lauren suspicious. She naturally assumed it probably was Melvin trying to lure her out of the house. And after calling the campus police to check, they responded by telling her that the message was not from anyone on the campus, and that, furthermore, she should ignore it at all costs. At this point, Lauren was confident that this was Melvin, and even despite him impersonating an officer, still nothing was done. Feeling helpless, she was left waiting for someone to help her situation. At 3 p.m. on October the 22nd, a surveillance camera captured Melvin sneaking into Lauren's apartment complex while she was out at class. And while she cautiously went about her business on campus, he kept a watchful eye on her front door. Later that afternoon, while she walked back to her apartment, she called her parents to tell them about the situation. And although the conversation was tense, she began to relax as her parents reassured her that she was going to be okay. Feeling better, Lauren was just about to enter her apartment when suddenly she screamed and the line went dead. Both confused and extremely worried, her father immediately called the emergency services to report on what had just happened.
Hi, my daughter, Lauren McCluskey, was talking to her mom, and then she just started saying, no, 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 and it sounded like someone might have been grabbing her or something.
Does she live on campus?
Yeah, she had broken up with a boy, Shawn is his name.
Has he made any threats or anything like that?
His friends were kind of harassing her a little bit.
Police were quickly dispatched to the area and quickly noticed that Lauren's backpack and phone were lying on the ground right outside of her apartment complex. Sadly, they were too late. After searching the surrounding area and all unlocked vehicles, a female body was found in the back of one of the cars. Tragically, it did belong to Lauren McCluskey. It was evident from the outset that she had suffered multiple gunshot wounds and was pronounced dead at the scene. However, as for her killer, he was nowhere to be found. Police soon learned that Melvin had driven the borrowed car into the campus parking lot, where he then confronted and grabbed Lauren and forced her into the back of the car. But instead of abducting her, he then haphazardly shot her multiple times with his firearm. It was then later discovered that Melvin was also breaking his parole conditions by messaging multiple women on dating apps while he was still in contact with Lauren. Shortly after murdering her, a new surveillance camera captured him walking away, where he was then picked up by a date to go out for dinner. To be clear, by the way, this woman had no idea that he had just murdered another woman, and to her later disgust, she had also inadvertently helped him escape a crime scene. After eating together, Melvin went back to the woman's house, showered, and was then dropped off at a coffee shop nearby. And shortly after midnight, Melvin was identified walking along a road by police. They followed him to a local Trinity church, and it was here that he raised Lauren's murder weapon to his own head and then pulled the trigger. The man, who had been reported over 20 times to multiple law enforcement agencies, who had abused multiple women, and had violated his parole multiple times, was now dead, thus taking any justice for Lauren with him. As you can imagine, the aftermath of this story was so unbearable for so many, and much like the case of Eve Carson, a lot of anger found its way towards the killer and the justice system. You would have thought that, after all the phone calls and evidence submitted by Lauren, a woman who was genuinely terrified for her life, that someone would have taken charge and helped her out. However, every single entity that was responsible for her protection failed in its own way at some point down the road, leading to a truly unnecessary death. Apparently, campus housing officials decided to not interfere with this because it was a consensual relationship and fell under, quote, common circumstances. And not only were they aware of his concerning behaviour and of his firearm violation, but they also knew that he was a registered offender. Honestly, I am really struggling to find the words for this. Everyone in that job should be held accountable, let alone fired. Campus security similarly did not take Lauren's worries seriously. The initial officer who failed to delegate the case before going on vacation had no excuse for their laziness. And even worse, nobody else bothered to review or pick up her case afterwards. Despite being in a place to protect students from exact situations like this, the security team at the University of Utah clearly did not prioritize Lauren's safety enough to help her. Imagine a world where you call for help repeatedly, submit legitimate criminal evidence, and you are still unable to find help. To make things even worse, one of the campus officers who had access to Lauren's nude photos had even saved them to his phone and showed other campus officers. He further bragged that he could look at these whenever he wanted, and another officer would even say, "You're lucky you got that case." The Salt Lake City police are not without fault either. If anyone had competently searched Melvin in the system, they would have found his criminal record and potentially stopped him before it was all too late. And despite being out of the jurisdiction of the issue, as they claimed, they had more than enough resources to quickly identify and locate him before he ever had the chance to take a life. Additionally, if anyone had spoken to his parole officer, they would have realized that this man was not a normal member of society. Instead, he was very clearly an active threat. And if any of these entities had a little more compassion or care, and had understood that this girl was scared for a very valid reason, then action could have easily been taken and her life could have been saved. Instead, the tragic story ends in the loss of a beautiful life, and a grieving family and community that are broken in her absence. As Lauren's story broke out, other students began to speak out about their own poor experiences with the university. The University of Utah's president initially made a statement to claim that, while the situation was tragic, the campus police officer could not have done anything more to protect their student. Of course, this enraged many members of the public. And eventually, after much public outcry and swallowing his wounded pride, the president made another statement to acknowledge that they had failed Lauren when she needed them the most. And in October of 2020, the University of Utah settled a legal dispute with Lauren's family. They were ordered to pay $10.5 million in compensation, though her family has made public statements since then to say they do not intend to financially profit from their daughter's death. Instead, the money was put towards the Lauren McCluskey Foundation, which, to this day, aims to fund research and education programs as well as resources to improve safety on college campuses. The foundation also aims to provide financial assistance to student track and field athletes, along with providing funds for animal welfare associations. In Lauren's family's own words, she was a beautiful young woman in all respects, and a worldwide outpouring of grief proves the light she brought during her life. The more I think about this case, the more frustrated I get with it. Lauren was failed by the system on so many levels, and this was by entities and people that should be there to protect her when she felt most vulnerable. I can't say that I'm for the police or against the police. I'm not really that opinionated when it comes to these things. But one thing is for certain, these people absolutely failed their job. Anyway, folks, I think I'm going to wrap this one up here before I get too carried away. But as always, I'd love to hear what you think about this case, so please do leave your thoughts in the comments section down below. If you found this video interesting, then please remember to like the video, and please consider subscribing if you haven't yet. It really does help me out. Anyway, folks, that is it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you again very soon for another video. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and of course, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.